Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music and coming soon, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.
This week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, there's no love lost between Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg, especially now that Zuckerberg's Meta has launched Thread to battle Twitter. So, will Thread take over Twitter? Well, that cage match that was discussed between the two before Thread's launch may be coming to fruition, or maybe I should say to blows. June's jobs report was released today, so how is the economy doing? Stocks ended lower today after the jobs report showed hiring has slowed, but what will it look like for next week's inflation numbers for June? And tonight, we'll have our second part of our interview with Oscar Munoz, the former CEO and chairman of United Airlines. We'll talk about the incident with TSA forcefully ejecting Dr. David Dow from a United flight and the blowback of that incident, plus much more. Oscar wrote a new book about United Airlines and his heart attack just 37 days into his tenure as CEO of the company. It's called Turnaround Time. Oscar Munoz will be with us tonight. I'm Andre Laborde. We've got these stories and more. It's Friday, and it's time for Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi, welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up. It's Friday, July the 7th. Well, the first half of the year, it's in the can. So how will the back half of 2023 go? Now, according to Dan Greenhouse of Solus Alternative Management, he's got some encouraging news. Now, just so you know, the S&P 500 ended the first half of the year up nearly 16%. Now, that's historically rare. According to Dan, when there have been gains of 12% or more in the first half of the year, now that's only happened 9 times: 1957, 1958, 1976, 85, 89, 91, 98, 2013, and 2 years ago coming out of the pandemic. This is the 10th time that this has happened. Now, all prior 9 times, the second half of the year was positive with an average return of 11% in the S&P. Now, this is on top of the almost 16% return we had for the first 6 months of 2023. So let's not forget the standard boilerplate message: past performance does not guarantee future returns. But so far, we're 9 out of 9. I'm not the best at math, but to me, that's 100% so far. Today's jobs report had the markets concerned if they'll be raising more interest rates. The Dow Jones had 3 straight down days. The top sector today in the S&P 500 was energy. Staples and healthcare were the worst S&P 500 performers. And this week, the Dow Jones closed today at 33,735. It was down just under 2% for the week. The S&P 500, they closed today at 43.99. That was down 1.1% for the week. And the NASDAQ, they closed today 13,657, down 0.9 of a point for the week. Well, the government released the June jobs report today, and Wall Street and the markets closed lower with today's numbers. Wall Street was expecting June payrolls to be an additional 240,000 jobs, but it was only 209,000. Now, this is showing that rising interest rates have been slowing the economy and tapering inflation. Unemployment for June is now at 3.6%. Now, in addition, there was a downward reduction of April and in May, showing 110,000 fewer jobs than were originally released. As always, the corrective numbers don't always get the headlines as the original numbers that were originally touted. Now, top sectors increasing were healthcare at 65,000 new jobs added, and government added an additional 60,000 more people added to the government payrolls. And retail lost the most at 11,000 jobs. Wages still have not yet kept up pace with inflation. Next week, the Commerce Department will be releasing June's Consumer Price Index. But as of this date, wages are up just under 4.5%. But core inflation, that's without food and energy, that's up just over 4.5%. Well, Oscar Munoz is the former CEO of United Airlines. He's also just written a new book about his time there called Turnaround Time. Hi, Oscar. Welcome back to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Hi, Andre. Nice to see you.
Before going into being CEO of United, you used to work at CSX as president. And just a couple of months ago, Norfolk Southern had a problem. Alan Shaw is the CEO at Norfolk Southern. And in East Palestine, Ohio, they had a train derailment. How would you advise the CEO of somebody like Alan Shaw? How do you maneuver into something, a catastrophe, a crisis such as that?
Yeah, I actually spoke on live on TV about that subject right after it happened and asked, in essence, the same question. And I'll repeat this. Uh, the trick to when you run an organization like that or like an airline, anticipating that at some point in time, despite everyone's best efforts and intents, something is going to go badly. And how you respond, when you respond, and the things that you do to make sure things don't happen are all part of the equation. And I think over time, what companies maybe forget that they're supposed to be prepared for this. So my advice wasn't advice, but just the practice that we deployed at CSX. And I had several of those when I was COO and when I was president, because things like that can happen. And so our mechanism was built right from the start to make sure we responded, and we responded quickly. There was no there was no decision point about how much that might cost or what should we do. We went right into a community right when it happened and immediately began to whatever needed to be done. You need to vacate people, you need to provide food, you need to provide money. There was no questions asked. In essence, the concept that we had was that if we broke it, we fixed it. And that's the approach that you have to take. And it has to be immediate. And when it isn't, you have the situation that developed in East Palatine.
You write about this in your book. When it comes to, we talked about flight crews and turnaround time and such. And there was in Louisville, Kentucky, you needed a flight crew, a flight maintenance crew before the next morning of getting together before all the flights would be delayed in Louisville. Well, you had to get a maintenance crew coming from Chicago to Louisville. And I'm talking about Flight 3411 from Chicago to Louisville. And I guess you got a call, you had a family function, you go back to the corporate apartment, y'all are having a good time, and I guess you get a phone call that nobody ever wants, I think Todd Islip, or the head of the Pilots Association, this is my words, starts off with saying, "Are you sitting down?" They had the problem that that it went viral worldwide of Flight 3411 about the passenger that was dragged off the airline. Talking about crises and such, what type of problems? Because I say you talk about it in the book. What type of problems were you going through right after that occurred?
There was no shortage of mistakes. Again, as I said earlier, I think a lot of the logic for writing the book that I did is to give others the experience and example of things that go wrong and how best you can recover from them. The situation, as you described it, it doesn't matter how you described it. What people saw, hundreds of millions of views worldwide, made us immediately infamous. And my initial response, due to a host of different reasons, were poor, and I was unprepared. And the lesson, I guess, that you take from this is that it is never too late to do the right thing. And so 2 days later, I went on national TV, and again, tens of millions of people watching. And rather than try to explain what was the facts, meaning United Airlines specifically was not involved in any of this. There was no United employee. The authorities at the airport were the ones that were physically involved. And the issue, there was all sorts of things that I could point to that would say, no, you have it wrong. United wasn't involved, but that wasn't the right thing to do. Back to the previous question, where if you break it, you fix it. That training plus my heritage and my upbringing just really couldn't have me sit in front of the camera and begin to point fingers. So I simply said, you know what, my fault. It was a horrible event. It won't happen again. We let policies and procedures, not wanting those later flights to be delayed and all those sorts of things that we could go into. We let those get in the way of doing the right thing for another human being. And what happened should have never happened. And so again, those are one of the critical lessons you learn, unfortunately, the hard way. And it's an important lesson for us because I could have easily went on and tried to explain all the nuances, but it would have felt like I was avoiding the issue. I wasn't taking the responsibility, and it would have just made it worse. And at that point in time, I'd already screwed it up a couple of days later with the initial response. So just own it and then work through it, and that's what we did.
Do you have I come from a military type of background, and in military they have what's called PAOs, public affairs officers. Large corporations have their PR people, and before that Good Morning America interview, you had your PR people say, well, if the reporter asks this, then you say this, and if they say this, then you pivot to that. And I remember, I think you even wrote that it was something like at 2 or 3 o'clock that morning, the morning of the interview, you woke up and you said, I'm not going to even listen to what my PR people say. I'm going to speak from my heart. And even though you couldn't sleep the rest of that night, you spoke from the heart. After that interview you were just talking about, and you were walking back to, I think it was at the Willis Towers, back to your offices in Chicago. What kind of looks did you get from your PR people?
Well, it wasn't the looks as the audible gasp that I could hear, both in the producer's ears from the reporter, who where do you go when someone says, you know what, I'm responsible, we own this, we're at fault, it's not going to happen again. There's not a lot to go from there for them. I'm expecting that I was going to begin to sort of spin. And then, of course, my team, concerned about what ramifications United might have, weren't prepared for me to say that either. So there was clearly audible gasps from both sides. But again, these are the critical lessons you learn when you become a leader. There was nowhere else to go, and for me, given my upbringing, given who I was, the truth was the most important thing. And again, quickly followed by, here are the things that we're going to do in this short a time frame. So it wasn't just like, oh gee, I'm sorry I did this, but here's what we're going to do to make sure this doesn't happen. And we put out a set of 10 things. So the advice is always, it's never the act but the cover up or whatever. And it just didn't make sense for do anything else. And it was tough. It was tough for the United family, because they were wondering, well, why did you take the blame? The facts are the facts. We didn't do anything. And again, we've talked about how that was probably going to be lost in the middle of the interview. So that's the stance that we took. And when they say that the leadership can be a lonely place, there was clearly a time when I had that example.
This is where you earn your pay. When you first started off as CEO, you went on a find out tour with people that would ever meet the CEO of United Airlines. And I'm talking about, you went into where the chefs, the cooks were preparing the food, to the ground handlers, and it always wasn't that they had some rocky questions because they weren't used to having the CEO actually come and talk to them. Did you start something? Was it United Air Talk or United
Airtime is called, right?
But in addition to the employees, can consumers, passengers as well, or is that only for the employees to get word to the CEO?
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think the initial implementation of that, I don't think it's in place anymore. I will say that by and large, customers of an airline don't often have much of a concern letting us know their feelings when something didn't go well. So we get plenty of feedback. So there's no shortage of that. But the initial rollout of that was to actually listen intently to what people had to say. It was a vehicle that was probably more of a concept. The real listening, the real engagement came, as you mentioned, when I physically went out into the workplace, in with customers, in with our folks, and the people that repair your aircraft, the people that handle your bags, the people that check you in, obviously the people that fly and serve you, all have um, infinitely important thoughts about why we were doing so badly. Because the context for this, for those of you who don't remember, back in that time, the company was at an absolute nadir of gosh, performance operationally, performance financially, customer performance, and how people saw us. across the board, and employee morale was quite down.
One of the things you wrote down, and I think you even asked your employees, are what are the 10 dumbest things we've done? Um, uh, did you get more than 10 from some employees? did,
Well,
did some employees, Oscar, say, Oscar, hey CEO, do I have to limit to only 10?
I have this phrase called the listening tour. Listen and learn before you lead. And as you're listening, it's a huge organization. There's just no way you can capture everything. So along the way, the thought was, let's provide proof, not promise, that I am indeed listening and the company's listening and there's something to do. And so that we would do little things. As soon as I heard something that was seemingly really silly and we could easily fix, we would go ahead and do that. So in the ecosystem, people would understand that, listen, they are listening and they are doing something about it. The 10 dumbest things was, again, I don't know exactly where I came up with that from, but it's like I was walking around and hearing so many silly things. I said, all right, team, give me the top 10 being that. And we got them and went just methodically fixing the easy ones quickly and then putting plans in to fix the ones that were longer term. And again, if you're going to listen and learn, you also got to prove, not just promise, that change will be made. We have so many wonderful stories about, how do you recapture the hearts and minds of all your employees? Well, you got to get them to trust you again. And the way you get them to trust you is to deliver on this concept that they indeed are important. They indeed have knowledge that is important to us as decision makers. And then more importantly, as human beings, that they're part of the cog, they're part of the solution. And I think that was the meaningful part of the turnaround at United.
Sometimes, I mean, most people who are watching who work for a company, usually, you have 50 employees or less, or 100 employees or less. I mean, United, 30,000, 35,000. You've got a culture. And sometimes it's hard. It's much easier to turn a sailboat than it is an aircraft carrier. How hard was it, even as CEO? And people think when you're the CEO, what you say automatically goes. Is it hard to change a culture when you've got that many people and you get feedback like, well, that's not how we usually do it?
The company for 5 to 6 years have been going through this divide. We had merged two companies. So in addition to all the dynamics you just mentioned, we also had the broader and bigger dynamic that people came from two different companies with great history and great pride in what they were able to do. So it was very difficult. We had a strong divide between management and the unions that represent well over 80% of the company's employee population. So yeah, it's how hard is it? It can be impossible, and it can be less impossible if you follow the right direction. And what that right direction differs from company to individual. But for me, the instinct was to go and recapture the trust of our employees by having these conversations individually. But I think one of my upbringings of leadership abilities and knowledge is that if you treat one person in the way you would treat kindly to another human being, that conversation goes further than just that person, because they began to tell others. And our company was so broken that what it needed to heal is a soothing, calming influence that actually genuinely appreciated what the thoughts were there, and that carried really quickly. Not easy, very difficult, but again, that's truly what we get paid for, to be able to lead that organization.
Oscar, when it comes to the and I don't know this answer, but I'm curious the psychology of, let's say, the passenger. Have there been studies done by airlines, like would a person prefer to pay a higher fee but not have to worry about paying extra baggage fees or changing of maybe your reservation for whatever reason it may be for a problem? Or would a person prefer to pay a lower fee and go, look, if I need, I don't mind paying an extra $25 for a baggage fee? Which way does the average passenger prefer?
I don't have any empirical evidence, but I do have demonstrable emotion that's affected all of us, all our airlines. I would characterize it mostly as if you surprise people to the negative, that tends to be an effect that's not positive. If you say, hey, you can fly from point A to point B and it's $49, you're like, oh, hey, great. So you buy it. Consumers don't read the detail, don't read the small print. Unfortunately, they see, especially on online, right? You see the $49, you book it, you're like, yeah, I got a great rate, only to show up at the airport and have to pay for your luggage, pay for your bag, pay the change fees, all those different things. And I think that surprise factor is what tends to drive people away, meaning, hey, you lied to me. The major airlines tend to include all of that in all those services, and our flights, our fares are all inclusive. But at the same time, I don't know of any empirical evidence this is one way. I know what I would want. I want to know what I'm getting when I buy it. The more transparent you can be in those things, it's the better.
Yeah. Oscar, I'm curious, I mean, because you even have it in your book, but all of us have flown at some time or another, and people have service animals with them, comfort animals. And, you see in the news, somebody brings in a boa constrictor, and you even, someone brought in a peacock. They want a peacock on air, or a scorpion, or scorpions, and like you said, thankfully nobody was hurt on this thing. You want to help the customer. You want to be there for the passenger. You want to try to help. Are there limitations today of service animals or service pets on planes?
I think every airline has different views on it or different procedures. But generally, the most important part, if you have an animal that's required for medical reasons, appropriate medical background and checking, the service animal is the terminology. That is 1,000% agreeable with everyone. It's important because it's for the safety of that human being. It appears to have slowed down just a little bit. And again, each airline is handling this in their own way. But always, I think, by and large, importantly, to make sure that true service animals that are required for health issues of an individual, we always want to make sure we recognize and support that.
Oscar, is it my imagination, are people's backsides getting wider, or airline seats getting thinner, smaller?
Yes, well, you're in America, so I think there is empirical evidence about that. Back to our conversation about the margins in the business, aircraft are very expensive, and every square inch of an airplane is very, very valuable. And frankly, if you made seats bigger and larger, there would be less space for customers. The cost of flying that aircraft is still the same. And therefore, in order to stay above water for a company, you'd have to charge more for each of those seats. You asked the question whether people would prefer a low price and pay accessories, or pay a higher price and not be surprised. I'm very confident that if we expanded the size of seats and charged the appropriate amount to do that, I think there would be a revolt there as well. So it's a never-ending issue. We try to design those slimline seats with as much comfort as possible. At United, we're trying to put entertainment on all those seats in the back, so you and your children and your loved ones can have some level of entertainment, given the economics of flying in today's business.
Yeah. Oscar, they asked Bill Clinton one time, what's the biggest perk that he misses as being president? And he said Air Force One. He enjoyed it. As you were the CEO of United Airlines, what's the biggest perk that you might miss of not being the CEO?
I am very fortunate because of what we were able to do at United, that the thing that I would miss the most if I wasn't, I'm blessed to have this regardless, the twinkle in the eye, the smile, the hug, the request for a picture that you get from employees every time you land, every time you see them somewhere. Even if you're out and about town, somebody will walk over. Obviously, as CEO, you got a lot of that, and an affection and caring for me, so I'm fortunate to not have to miss the thing that I found most rewarding about my time at United.
Well, Oscar, the book is called Turnaround Time. Thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I learned a lot about the airline industry, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was great to see you again.
Thanks, Oscar. Well, if you have a question or maybe a comment about the show, We'd love to hear from you. Make it concise, make it pithy. Write us and notice the new email address at andre@benecapital.com. Now, next week, Commerce Department will be releasing June's inflation numbers. So let's take a look at the markets heading into next week. But first, what news publication started on this day, today in 1889? Well, we've got that answer, and it's coming up. Well, what news publication started on this day in 1889? The Wall Street Journal. So let's have a wrap up on Wall Street. People have been leaving high-tax cities and moving mostly to Florida and in Texas. Now, according to the Bank of America, home prices there have seen increases with the highest in Tampa and Orlando, and followed by Phoenix. Now, where are the most people coming from? New York City is the leading, followed by San Francisco, California, and Seattle and San Jose, California. It's also known that there's no love lost between Meta's Mark Zuckerberg and Twitter's Elon Musk. There's even talk of an MMA match. But this week, Meta launched the social app Threads to go against Twitter. Now, in the first week, actually only since really Wednesday of signing on, they've picked up 70 million subscribers. And speaking of Musk and Tesla, the first half of 2023 auto EV sales show that Tesla dominates the EV market with just over 60% in sales, as the closest rival is Hyundai Kia, a distant second at just under 7%, followed by GM and then Ford with just over 4.5%. Can you put a price on financial security? Well, apparently so. A new survey by Bankrate.com asked what amount annually would make you financially secure. The majority of working Americans said that they needed $233,000 per year just to feel financially secure. Now, the problem is the average nationwide full-time salary, according to Bankrate.com, is $75,000 per year. Now, of course, this salary depends on what part of the country you live in and the cost of living. And that's a wrap-up on Wall Street Wrap-Up. So join me next week when we'll be talking with J.P. Morgan's Chief Global Strategist, David Kelly. Well, that's our show for this Friday, July the 7th. Our thanks to Oscar Munoz for being with us this evening. But as always, it's you we appreciate for allowing us into your homes tonight. Have a fun weekend with the ones you love. I'll see you next week. Remember, if it's Friday, it's Wall Street Wrap-Up. I'm Andre Laborde. Always remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music and coming soon, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.